So let's make our knot. First thing I'm going to do is measure about 1.5 inches, no more, from one end of my leather. And I'm going to hold that steady while I make a loop with the long piece of leather going behind that short tail. And I'm going to pinch where they cross together so I can hold that loop open and thread on my beads on this long tail. So I have a pewter bead, my glass bead, and another pewter bead. I'm going to scooch those back up here to the left and bring this long piece of leather underneath that loop that I made. And notice I'm going underneath both sides of the loop and over this tail. So let me kind of hold that out so you can see it. So this is what you should have. I've got my initial loop that we made, and then with my long tail here, I came around and made another loop down here that has my beads on it and went behind this first petal. I try to think of these two as flower petals, and you want them to cross just like this because it will be easier to make your knot. And then with this long tail on the other side, I switch hands, and think of it this way. Since this piece of leather is coming over this short tail, that means I have to go under the piece of leather in this first loop. So I'm going to go under with that one. I'm going to go over the leather in my initial little loop here. And while I'm under this piece of leather, I'm going to come through. See this little hole right here that I'm poking through? That's the space between your two. Remember how I said it's important to think of these as two petals? This hole right here is the space between your two petals. And see how I have a Celtic knot now. So let's do it again with the second piece of leather. And let me see if I can try to zoom in a bit to make it clearer. So I've got 1.5 inches of leather here that I want to mark with my fingernail while I make the loop. And my leather is going behind that little 1.5 inch piece. And with the long tail, I'm going to add a pewter spacer, my glass bead, and another pewter spacer. This long tail now goes behind that initial loop that we made, and above to cross over that 1.5 inch tail. See how I've got it on top. Now since that's on top, I'm going to work my under the first piece of leather, over the second piece of leather, then I'm automatically under the third, so I know I have to come up through that hole right there to be over the other loop. And there's my knot. Now, how the earrings look, it depends on how tightly you pull up the loops on your knot. On these earrings, for example, I left it really loose. I actually stuck my finger kind of in that hole and pulled it open into a circle and left it like that while I glued these ends in my cap. On this one here, I tightened it up just a little bit. Let me get those further in view here. And you can tighten it in a number of ways. You can pull these tails to make this part longer, right? Oops. And tighten them like that. And you can pull this part below too to make your knot tighter, which gives you a bigger loop down here. And you could leave them like that and put your cap on, or you could adjust it and trim whatever amount off you want of these tails, okay? Or I could make them really tight. I had a sample. Oh, here we go, like this one. If you noticed, I've really pulled that knot up small, made this loop relatively small, and cut a lot of the leather off to glue on my cap. So it's up to you. I think we're probably going to go with kind of this in-between look here. And let me adjust this one, and this is probably the hardest part, getting them adjusted so they look exactly the same. And I never finish one until I have them both adjusted. And the metallic leather is probably just a little bit tougher to get to look even because it's got a coating on it. But I do like how it looks. And this is a gunmetal colored leather that's kind of got a shiny coating on it. And I think that looks pretty close. I think they're the same length, but this loop is just a little bit broader. Now let's check it again. And it can also, sometimes if you look at it and say, they look the same, but something's a little bit off. If you lay them on top of each other, you can tell. And it looks like my loops are the same size, but I've got a bigger bow, or knot rather, on the top of the other one. So I don't want to, I know the bottom's good, so I don't want to pull up that length. So I'm going to push my tails down just a little bit on each side to kind of open that knot up. There, I think that looks good. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is put our cap on. Now, depending on your leather, 1.5 millimeter leather is sometimes bigger than that and sometimes smaller. So you might have to trim your ends to a point to get them both in your cap, but this leather doesn't seem that thick. So the first thing I'm going to do is get my ends centered up and trim them off evenly, and then cut the second pair of earrings so that my ends are the same length. The first step in making the earrings look identical. All right. And with my cap, I like to use HypoCement. It doesn't discolor my leather, and it stays flexible even when it's dry. And it's got this little pointy applicator point on it. But you could use E6000 or a gel-based. I wouldn't use regular super glue because it's going to run on your leather. And super glue will discolor your leather. Even the gel kind, it dries kind of white. So be careful that you don't use anything that's not pretty thick, or it's going to run down onto your piece. So I'm going to put some of this in the tube. And alternatively, you can put it on the leather and then shove the leather ends into the tube. So let me get those started in there. And I'm going to look at it and notice my cap is tipped. For the earrings to hang straight, I need that cap positioned so that the opening is facing me when I look at the earrings. And you can also take the tip of that leather, or the tip of that glue, sorry, and shove it up right in the opening of that cap, just to make sure that's filled up. Make sure I'm forward. Let's do the same thing with the second earring. Put a little in there. Take my ends and hold them together as I push them into my cap. Turn the cap so it's facing me. And make sure your leather's side by side as much as you can and it's not twisted. That's another thing that will kind of twist your earrings when you put them on. And let me just run a little bit more glue in there and wipe it off my cap. Okay, So we're going to let those dry for about 15 minutes. Welcome back. I've let these dry for a few minutes. I still probably wouldn't wear them for about another hour, but they're dry enough for me to put the ear wires on now. I have these ear wires with the little balls on the end. If you have chain nose pliers or bent chain nose pliers, you can grasp the front half of that U shape right below the ball. Be careful you don't grab the ball and pop it off. And just gently pull it forward towards you. And that opens the ear wire. And I'm going to slide it through the loop at the top from the back of the ear wire so that that swings right on there, and then grasp that U shape again and push it back and in so that that little ball touches right above. And if you don't have pliers, these are easy to open with your fingers too. Instead of pulling forward, I usually push back, though. It's a little bit easier motion if you're doing it with your fingers. So I'm going to push the ball back again to open that up. Put the earring on from the end of the wire with the front, if you have a front that you like better, of your earring facing you, and swing that around down into that loop, and then grab that little ball again and push it forward and in to close it. And there you have your Celtic Knot earrings. So I hope you enjoy them, and you'll join me for more videos on the Pumpkin Glass YouTube channel.